I showed up at my only son's wedding, wearing the blue dress he once said made me look like a queen. I was holding the gift I saved months to buy, smiling through tears of joy. But before I could even step inside, the usher stretched out his arm and blocked me. He said in a firm voice, "The bride doesn't want distractions today. You'll make her anxious. Just head home, okay?" My heart dropped. Guests were staring. Whispers filled the air. I was the groom's mother, yet I was treated like a stranger. I smiled to hide the pain and walked away. What no one knew then was that the land they were standing on, the land where they built their fairy tale wedding, belonged to me. And before the night was over, the police would arrive to shut it all down. If you want to know how it all happened, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. My name is Elena Carter. I am 52 years old, and I raised my son, Daniel, on my own after his father walked out when he was only 2. Life wasn't easy. I worked 2 jobs for years, sometimes 3, just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. There were nights when I came home exhausted, but the moment I saw Daniel's smile, it felt worth it. Daniel and I were close. When he was little, we would watch superhero movies together and argue about which one was the best. I never missed a single soccer game, no matter how tired I was. On the day he graduated college, I cried harder than he did. He used to call me his best friend. But things started to change when he met Madison Blake. She was beautiful, confident, and from a wealthy family. At first, I thought she would bring Daniel happiness. But soon, I noticed how she looked at me, as if I didn't belong in his world anymore. She was polite in public, but in private, she made it clear she didn't want me too close. When they announced their wedding, I wanted nothing more than to see Daniel happy. The invitation never reached me directly. I only heard about the details through Daniel, not Madison. That hurt, but I brushed it off. I told myself it was his big day, not mine. The wedding was set at a countryside estate, beautiful and expensive looking, but there was a truth nobody seemed to know. That land had been in my family for generations. It was left to me by my father, George Carter, a proud veteran who always told me, "This land is your inheritance, Elena. It's your roots. Never let anyone take it from you." I never leased it out to Madison's family, and I never gave permission for anyone to use it. When I saw their wedding decorations spread across my father's land, I should have spoken up right away. But instead, I smiled, stayed quiet, and tried to be the bigger person. Little did they know that silence wouldn't last for long. When I arrived at the entrance of the wedding, my heart was racing with excitement. I held the carefully wrapped gift in my hands. A watch I had saved for months to buy, the kind Daniel had admired years ago when we passed by a store window together. I wanted him to know that no matter how grown he was, no matter how far life took him, I would always be there to celebrate his milestones. As I walked toward the decorated archway, music floated through the air. Laughter spilled across the lawn, and I could see people in their finest clothes taking their seats. For a moment, my eyes welled up with pride. That was my son up there, my boy who I raised through every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late-night homework session. I took a deep breath, ready to step inside and watch his life change forever. But then, an arm shot out in front of me. A young man in a black suit, tall and stiff, blocked my way. His name tag read, Trevor. He looked uncomfortable, but his words came out cold and rehearsed. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, not even looking me in the eye. "The bride asked for no distractions today. You'll make her anxious. Please, head home." For a second, I didn't understand. I blinked at him, thinking I had misheard. "Distractions? I'm his mother," I said, my voice trembling. Trevor shifted uneasily, but repeated, "Yes, ma'am. But these are the bride's instructions. It's better if you leave." The world seemed to stop around me. Guests slowed their steps to glance at me, some whispering, others pretending not to notice. My cheeks burned as if someone had slapped me. I wanted to shout, to demand Daniel come out and explain why I was being treated this way, but the words caught in my throat. My son was inside, probably smiling, preparing to say his vows, and here I was, his mother, standing outside like an uninvited guest. I forced a smile, though my hands shook so badly, I thought I might drop the gift. "Of course," I said softly, nodding. My voice cracked, but I kept my head high. "Please tell Daniel I was here. I placed the gift gently on the table near the entrance, where dozens of other presents were stacked. It looked so small, so modest compared to the gold-trimmed boxes around it, but it carried every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every ounce of love I had poured into raising him. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of Madison across the lawn. She was radiant in her gown, her smile wide, her hand clutching Daniel's arm. For a split second, her eyes flicked toward me. There was no surprise in them, no curiosity, only satisfaction. She had known I would be turned away. In fact, I realized with a sinking feeling, this was her plan. I walked back to my car slowly, each step heavier than the last. Inside, I gripped the steering wheel, my vision blurred with tears. My chest ached, not from the words of a stranger, but from the silence of my son. He hadn't come out. He hadn't asked where I was. He hadn't defended me. Sitting there, I replayed every memory. Daniel running into my arms after scoring his first goal. Daniel crying on my shoulder after his first heartbreak. Daniel holding my hand at his graduation ceremony and whispering, "We did it, Mom." Now, on the most important day of his life, I wasn't welcome. I wanted to believe he didn't know that Madison had made this cruel decision alone. But a part of me wondered if Daniel had chosen silence because it was easier. That hurt more than anything Madison could ever do. The humiliation cut deep, but beneath it was something else, a rising fire in my chest. As I looked out the window at the sprawling estate, covered in flowers and lights, my father's voice echoed in my mind. "This land is your inheritance, Elena. It's your roots. Never let anyone take it from you." That's when the realization hit me with full force. All this beauty, all this celebration, every single chair and ribbon and flower arrangement was sitting on my land. My land. Land that Madison's family never asked permission to use. Land I never signed over. Land that carried my father's blood, sweat, and sacrifice. They had shut me out of my own son's wedding, on property that legally belonged to me. The shame in my chest began to turn into something sharper. I wasn't powerless. I didn't have to create a scene or beg for respect. I had the law on my side. My family's legacy was being trampled without permission, and I would not let that slide. With trembling hands, I picked up my phone. I dialed the sheriff's office, my voice steady as I explained the situation. There was a wedding happening on private land without authorization. The officer on the other end listened carefully and assured me they would send a unit to investigate. As I hung up, I leaned back in my seat, wiping the last of my tears. I no longer felt like the unwanted mother standing outside her son's wedding. I felt like a woman reclaiming her dignity. Let Madison and her family enjoy their picture-perfect ceremony for now. They had no idea what was coming. I sat in my car for a long time after making that call to the sheriff's office. My hands were still shaking, not just from the sting of being turned away, but from the flood of emotions I had been holding back for years. I stared out at the estate, at the fairy lights draped across the trees, the elegant white chairs lined up in rows, and the giant floral arch where my son would soon be standing. The scene was beautiful, but to me, it was like looking at a painting of a life I wasn't allowed to be part of. I thought about walking away completely. Maybe I should drive home, close the curtains, and cry into a pillow until the day was over. Maybe that would have been easier. But then I remembered the way Madison's eyes had flicked to mine when Trevor blocked me at the entrance. That look of smug victory, that silent message that I wasn't good enough for her, that I didn't belong in my own son's life. That was when my pain began to harden into something else. Resolve. I thought of my father again, of how he had worked 2 jobs himself just to buy that land so many years ago. He used to tell me stories of building the fences with his bare hands, cutting the grass in the summer heat, and planting trees that still stood tall today. He wanted me to have something permanent, something that no one could ever take away. That land wasn't just dirt and grass. It was my family's history, my inheritance, my responsibility. And now, without so much as a phone call, Madison's family had decorated it, turned it into their stage, and even had the nerve to push me out of it. I wasn't going to scream or cause a scene. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at my own son's wedding. Number. I would do what my father always taught me. Stand tall, act with dignity, and let the truth speak louder than anger. So I stayed. I stayed in my car, parked just far enough down the road that I could see the estate lights glowing against the darkening sky. Guests continued to arrive, dressed in their glamorous outfits, unaware that their evening would soon take a very different turn. I could hear faint echoes of music and laughter when the wind shifted. The sounds cut me deeply, but they also reminded me why I had to follow through. As I sat there waiting, my mind drifted back to Daniel. I thought about the times I carried him on my shoulders, the way he used to grab my hand in crowded places, the way he would say, "Don't ever leave me, Mom." He had been my whole world. And yet, here I was, left outside on the biggest day of his life. I told myself over and over that maybe he didn't know what Madison had planned. Maybe he was too distracted, too in love, to realize she was pushing me out. But the reality still cut deep. He hadn't come looking for me. That realization gave me a kind of clarity. This wasn't just about me being humiliated. This was about boundaries, respect, and dignity. If I let this go, Madison would always believe she could erase me from Daniel's life, and Daniel would never learn the importance of standing up for his own family. So I waited, calm but steady, for the officers to arrive. I checked the time. It had been nearly an hour since the ceremony began. I imagined Daniel standing at the altar, Madison smiling at the crowd, their friends and family clapping as they exchanged vows. Every minute that ticked by was another reminder of the choice they had made to shut me out. But every minute that passed also brought me closer to justice. The sky turned from golden to deep blue. The fairy lights grew brighter against the night. And then, finally, I saw headlights in the distance. 2 sheriff's vehicles slowed as they approached, their flashing lights muted for the moment. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a strange mixture of relief and strength. This was it. I stepped out of my car and met the officers halfway. One of them, a tall man with kind eyes, asked, "Ma'am, are you the property owner who called?" "Yes," I said firmly, handing over the papers I always kept in my glove compartment, the deed to the land with my name on it. "They're holding a wedding on my property without my permission." He studied the documents, then nodded. "We'll take it from here." As they drove onto the estate, I stayed where I was, arms crossed, standing tall in the glow of my headlights. I didn't need to storm in. I didn't need to scream. The truth was about to walk into that wedding louder than I ever could. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt all day: control. I wasn't just the mother who had been cast aside. I was the owner of the land beneath their feet. And soon, everyone, Madison, her family, even Daniel, would realize the waiting was over. The reckoning was about to begin. The wedding was in full swing when the sheriff's cars finally rolled onto the estate. From where I stood at the edge of the property, I could see the red and blue lights reflecting against the white chairs and the shimmering decorations. At first, the music kept playing, and people assumed it was nothing more than a passerby or a coincidence. But when the officers stepped out of their vehicles and began walking toward the ceremony, heads turned, the chatter stopped. Confusion rippled through the crowd like a cold wind. I moved closer, far enough that I could see everything, close enough that they would all see me too. My heels crunched against the gravel as I walked slowly toward the lights, my head held high. I wasn't sneaking or hiding. This was my land, and I had nothing to be ashamed of. The ceremony. Daniel was standing at the altar, looking stunned, his hand gripping Madison's tightly. Madison's smile faltered as she glanced around, trying to piece together what was happening. The pastor cleared his throat nervously, waiting for direction. Guests whispered in hushed voices. One of the officers raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to stop this ceremony immediately. This event is being held on private property without authorization." Gasps rose from the crowd. A few guests looked toward Madison's family, who were already shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Madison's father, a tall man in an expensive gray suit, jumped up. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "We rented this venue weeks ago. There must be some mistake." The officer shook his head calmly. "No mistake. The landowner has made a formal complaint, and we have proof of ownership on record. Unless the owner gave explicit permission for this event, everyone needs to leave the property." A stunned silence followed, and then I stepped forward. All eyes turned toward me. "I am the landowner," I said clearly, my voice steady even as my heart thundered in my chest. "My name is Elena Carter. This is my land. You never asked me for permission to use it." The crowd erupted, shocked gasps, whispers, and even a few murmurs of disbelief filled the air. Madison's face drained of color. Her perfectly painted smile vanished, and she clutched Daniel's arm even tighter, as if holding onto him would stop the truth from sinking in. Daniel looked at me, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. His eyes darted between me and Madison, confusion and horror written all over his face. "Mom?" he finally whispered, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Yes, Daniel," I said, looking straight at him. "This land has been in our family for generations. Your grandfather built his life here, and he passed it down to me. And today, your bride and her family decided to throw a wedding here without even asking me. Worse than that, they had me turned away at the door. Your own mother. On your wedding day." The whispers grew louder. People were shaking their heads, exchanging wide-eyed glances. Madison's father tried to recover, his voice booming. "We were told this property was available. Clearly there's some misunderstanding." "No," I said firmly, cutting him off. "There is no misunderstanding. You knew exactly what you were doing. You ignored me, disrespected me, and tried to erase me from my son's life. But you forgot one thing. You don't own this land." "I do." Madison's voice finally broke through the noise, sharp and frantic. "Why are you doing this?" she snapped. "You're ruining everything." I looked her straight in the eye. "No, Madison. You ruined everything when you decided I wasn't good enough to be part of this day. When you treated me like I was a distraction instead of the woman who raised the man you claimed to love. This isn't about revenge. This is about respect. And if you can't respect me, then you can't use my land for your perfect little wedding." The sheriff's officer stepped in again. "Everyone needs to clear the property immediately. Failure to do so will be considered trespassing." Chaos erupted. Guests stood up, some grabbing their purses and jackets, others demanding explanations. The string quartet stopped playing. The photographer lowered his camera, looking completely lost. Madison's mother buried her face in her hands, and Madison herself was trembling with fury, hissing at her father and Daniel in rapid whispers. Daniel stood frozen at the altar, staring at me with wide, conflicted eyes. "Mom," he said again, louder this time, as if trying to reach me. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Tears burned my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Maybe you didn't know, Daniel," I said quietly, so only he in the front rows could hear. "But you also didn't ask. You let her speak for you. You let her silence me, and that hurt more than anything else." For the first time, I saw his shoulders slump, his face filled with shame. He looked down at the ground, and I knew my words had struck deeper than any argument ever could. The guests began filing out, grumbling about the ruined evening. The sheriff's officers stayed firm, guiding people toward the exits. Madison's family argued among themselves, their voices harsh and angry. And me? I stood tall, calm, watching it all unravel. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't made a scene. I had simply told the truth and let the law enforce what was already mine. And in that moment, as the fairy lights flickered against the night sky and the wedding collapsed around them, I felt a quiet, powerful sense of justice. They had tried to erase me, but instead, they erased their own perfect day. When the last of the guests finally left the property, the once vibrant wedding looked like a battlefield. White chairs stood knocked over, flower petals were scattered across the grass, and the air was heavy with tension and embarrassment. The string of fairy lights still glowed softly against the night, but instead of joy, they illuminated shame. I stood quietly near the edge of the property, watching as Madison and her family gathered their things in a rush, their anger spilling out in sharp whispers and snapping voices. For a moment, I almost pitied them, almost. But then I reminded myself of the way I had been treated earlier that day, how easily they dismissed me, how confidently they believed I could be erased. That reminder steadied me. Madison's father stormed off first, his face red with humiliation. Her mother followed, clutching her purse tightly, her heels clicking fast against the stone pathway. Madison herself stayed behind, her face twisted with rage, her once perfect wedding gown dragging across the dirt, as if the night itself had betrayed her. She glared at me with an intensity that could have cut glass. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," she spat, her voice trembling with fury. "And you destroyed it." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply looked at her and said, "No, Madison, you destroyed it the moment you tried to cut me out of my son's life. Actions have consequences. Tonight, you faced yours." She had no response. She turned on her heel and stormed off into the night, dragging Daniel behind her. Daniel, my son. He lingered after everyone else had gone, his face pale and full of shame. He walked toward me slowly, his shoulders heavy, as if the weight of the entire day pressed down on him. When he finally stood in front of me, he couldn't even meet my eyes. "Mom," he whispered. His voice cracked, and for a second, I saw the little boy I used to hold, the one who would tug on my sleeve and beg me never to leave. "I didn't know this would happen. I didn't know she kept you out. I thought you just didn't want to be here." Those words cut deeper than I expected. I had sacrificed so much for him, given every piece of myself to make sure he had a good life, and somehow he had believed I wouldn't want to be there for his wedding. That told me just how much distance Madison had managed to put between us. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Daniel, I've always wanted to be there for you. Always. But you didn't ask me. You let her make decisions for you. You let her decide who belonged in your life and who didn't. And today, you stood at that altar while your mother was turned away, like she was nothing." He finally looked at me then, his eyes full of tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know it would be like this. I should have spoken up. I should have checked. I raised my hand to stop him. "I don't want excuses, Daniel. I just want you to understand something. Respect is earned, not demanded. And when you give someone permission to silence the people who love you, you lose more than just family. You lose your roots." He broke down then, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. For a long time, we stood there in silence, the only sounds the soft hum of the crickets and the faint rustle of the trees my father had planted decades ago. I didn't know what the future held for us. I didn't know if Madison would remain in his life or if Daniel would find the strength to draw boundaries. What I did know was that tonight had drawn a line in the sand. I had shown him that I wasn't a woman to be erased, that his mother wasn't disposable, that the land beneath his feet carried not only his grandfather's legacy, but mine too. As I drove home later that night, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the humiliation, the anger, but also the strength I had found in myself. I realized something important. Sometimes the greatest power doesn't come from shouting or fighting. It comes from patience, from standing firm, from letting the truth reveal itself when the time is right. I didn't ruin that wedding. They ruined it themselves, the moment they chose arrogance over respect. All I did was remind them of reality. When I walked into my quiet home, I set down my purse, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of my living room. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small or invisible. I felt strong. My father's words echoed in my mind again, and this time, they felt like a promise fulfilled. "This land is your inheritance, Elena. Never let anyone take it from you." That night, I went to bed, not as the mother who had been cast aside, but as the woman who had reclaimed her dignity. And maybe, just maybe, Daniel would finally understand that no matter how much he loved someone else, the bond between a mother and her child should never be treated like a distraction. If you were in my place, would you have walked away quietly, or would you have stood your ground? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.